Welcome to the Unabridged podcast. I'm Ashley.
And this is Jen.
Join us for bookish episodes and check out our website, unabridgedpod.com, where you can find lots of new bookish content to grow your TBR.
Sign up for our newsletter to find out more about online book discussions and upcoming events. Find us on Patreon for extra unabridged content. Join us on Instagram and Facebook at unabridgedpod and message us there or see our website to get plugged into the Unabridged community. You want opinions about books? We've got them.
Hi, and welcome to Unabridged. This is episode 289. Today, we are excited to share what was a Patreon recording that we did, which is focused on Nella Larsen's passing, and we're discussing the film adaptation. We'll also link in the show notes our book club episode. We did discuss the book as well and thoroughly enjoyed reading it and then watching the movie, so we're excited to share that with you today. Before we get into that, we wanted to share our bookish check-in. Jen, what are you reading?
So one of the books I'm reading is Priscilla Morris's Black Butterflies. This is a Read with Tony Buddy read book. And it is just, I'm about halfway through. It is so powerful. So it's set in Sarajevo in 1992. And it focuses on a woman named Zora, who is a teacher and an artist. She lives there with her mother and her husband. And at the beginning of the novel, things have been getting worse in the city. And so, for example, the book opens with her finding squatters in her mother's apartment. Her mother stays with them during the winter months when she is less well. And basically, any uninhabited apartments are taken over in the city. And the police force is just not doing anything about this type of thing. So you can see that the things that make the society work are crumbling. So her mother's health is really poor, and her husband and mother decide to go stay for a little while with their daughter, who is in England, leaving Zora on her own. She's in the middle of a big art piece and feels that she can't leave. And the city falls when she is there alone. And yeah, basically that's sort of where I am as she is realizing she keeps trying to make things normal for herself, as do all of the people around her. And then more and more, they are just unable to. And, phone lines are cut. They lose access to the internet as she's walking to work each morning when she still has a place to go to work. There's the danger of snipers everywhere. And so it's just that the sense of disbelief that she's feeling. She really loves her city and feels this great passion for staying there and for trying to make change and to keep the feeling of acceptance that she felt like was always really important. And yet, of course, she wants to be with her family. So it's been a tough read. It's a powerful read, and the writing is just beautiful. So I highly recommend it, even though I haven't finished it yet. That is Priscilla Morris's Black Butterflies.
Well, Jen, I hadn't heard about that one, but yeah, sounds really powerful.
Yeah, it is. I am in the midst of, I just realized as I was describing it, several very heavy books right now.
So actually it sounds a lot like the buddy read that we did, set in Syria. Okay, but as long as the lemon trees grow, that a lot of those same feelings come up in that book of you're passionate about your country, a sense of place, a sense of responsibility for the people around you. And yet, at what point do you care for yourself and your loved ones over that dedication to place and community? And those are really hard questions.
Yeah. Several of us in the chat brought up that book. And yeah, the parallels, even though they are in different places, I think that feeling of helplessness as you watch the place that you love crumble around you is common to both. And just the way the regimes that are coming into power are hitting at the very things that made life livable it's really striking. So, yeah. All right. Well, maybe on a lighter note, I hope. What are you reading, Ashley?
This one is much more focused on my own well-being. So this is Amy Wilson's Happy to Help, and it has a subtitle, Adventures of a People Pleaser. And I am loving this. This is a series of essays. It is a look at how women are conditioned to be happy to help, as the title suggests, And I'm doing a lot of hard work in that department to try to not constantly, in fact, so on the cover, it is all text on the cover, and it's like, no problem. It's on my way. I'll be right on that. I think I can make it. No, thanks. I'm good. Don't worry. I got it. And I feel that all of my clients that I work with these days, that is what they love. That I'm like, got it. No problem. On it. Already doing it. And that is very satisfying, right? You do those things and it feels really good because everyone is very affirming. And long range, it is not great, as many of you listening experience firsthand. So I am really appreciating it. It does not offer answers. She does not try to say all these solutions. It does not feel like a self-help book, though I probably need some of those in this department as well. But it is very much just about, each essay focuses on different things, but all of them have this common thread of the ways in which she was conditioned, continues to be conditioned to be that way, and how difficult it is for everyone if she tries to move out of that groove at any time. And all of that feels very resonant to me. So again, that is Amy Wilson's Happy to Help Adventures of a People Pleaser. And it is a series of essays. I'm listening to it. She reads it. I really like it.
I don't know if I feel seen or targeted, but yes.
I know. I mean, some of them I've been like, oh, this is so. And in fact, it reminds me a little bit of, I talked about this on the podcast, but it's been a couple of years now, of Jesse Klein's I'll Show Myself Out. And same, Jen, that like sometimes I was like, oh, this feels so like powerful and so affirming that someone else is like experiencing exactly what I feel is only in my own brain. And then at other times it's like, oh, I know. It's like illuminating a thing I already knew, but in a lot more clarity. And sometimes having that clearer picture does not feel great. So some of both, but again, really in my life, but especially in my work life, like it is something I'm trying to work on. And so it is helpful to have compassion for myself and the reasons why I, at this point in midlife, have so deeply entrenched this thing that is a problem for me. And also thinking through why it is worth the work to try to, hold some boundaries that in the past I have never held, or those kinds of things. So anyway, it's illuminating.
That sounds very good. I don't know if I'm ready for that right now, but maybe someday I'll put it on my list.
Yep. There you go. Well, we hope you enjoy our discussion of the film adaptation of Nella Larsen's passing. And we will pop back on at the end with our Lit Chat game to wrap up today's episode.
Hey everyone, we are here today to talk about the adaptation of Nella Larsen's Passing, which is available on Netflix. And so, of course, we read the book last month, and we're happy to watch this adaptation, which has been on my list for a while. Let's just start with overall impressions. Ashley, what do you think?
I loved it. I thought it was really well done. I thought it moved well. I thought it captured a lot of what we talked about in the book about the showing of things that were really impactful without having to say it all out loud. So I think I really enjoyed it. What about you, Chen?
Yeah, I really there's nothing I can point to that didn't work for me. I thought it was beautifully done. I think the acting is incredible. I wasn't swept away quite as much as I was by the book.
That was true,
and that just might be because it was my second time through the story, or I'm crazy busy right now. I don't know why, but yeah, I think it's remarkably well done, and I just think the choices that they made, like you said, there's so much silence that is really powerful through the film. And I thought that was done well, that they weren't trying to crowd everything in and narrate everything at the audience. They did a great job just showing, not telling, which seems like it's obvious for a movie, but isn't always. Sometimes I feel like the director feels like they have to over-explain, or maybe it's the screenwriter. But yeah, I thought it was really, really beautiful. All right, well, let's dive right in. Are there particular things that stood out to you?
When I'm thinking about, yeah, I mean, I agree. I do think that was true about the showing, not telling. I will say there were times if I had not read the book, I do think there could have been a little more
Hmm.
commentary. So I don't love voiceover a lot of times, but there were times where like I felt like the audience needed to be a little more in on what was happening. But um, something that really stood out to me at the beginning was the tension in the hotel.
Hmm.
So, like, right at the start, I think that whole scene was really impactful because we both felt the tension of Irene being in a white space and her discomfort with that, but also the ease with what she could be there. And yet, we see her like reckoning with what that means. And then to see Claire. And I felt like when they first start interacting, I mean, it is just there's a lot of layers in them seeing each other, in them recognizing that they're both in this space, they're both passing in that moment. And then going back to the hotel room, and I had mentioned this in our book discussion, but I felt like there is a lot of like chemistry tension between them. And I felt like that was
Yes.
accentuated in the movie in a way that I really appreciated because I think that that is a layer that Larsen in the 1920s is not directly stating, but is certainly putting into the text. And I think that is relevant in everything that
Yes.
unfolds between Irene and Claire. Like the way that Irene continues to let Claire into their lives, even though she's resentful, even though she's annoyed. And also the way that Claire gravitates toward Brian in some ways just because Irene gravitates toward
Yes.
Brian. And so I thought all of that was really well explored. And again, in a way that was just shown through it's Tessa Thompson as Irene and then Ruth Nega. And just like that tension between those two actors, I thought was really well done.
Yes. I
So I think we
agree.
see it at the beginning, but then it kind of throughout, we continue to see that the traces of those things.
Right. Well, and I think it builds on that ambiguity of why is Irene so drawn to Claire? Why, like that envy, the wanting to be with the other, but also wanting to be the other, wanting to try on the choices that they've made in their lives, that Irene rejects the idea of passing, but clearly not entirely. And she is curious. And the way it's shot, Tessa Thompson's Irene looking up through the brim of her hat
Oh,
so
yes.
often was just so symbolically powerful. And Ruth Nega as Claire has all of this light around her just always. And yeah, I thought that communicated really well what was in the book that
Yes.
says so much about their personalities. And Tessa Thompson plays Irene as such a confident woman at first. And then you see those moments of uncertainty and of hesitancy. And yeah, it's really well done. I think Alexander Skarsgård as the horrible husband, Jack Ballou, he's always a good evil guy, but played that particular type of ugliness really well. And
He's so physically imposing. Like, I mean,
mhm,
I wanted to Google how tall he was because I was like,
yeah,
oh my gosh. And some of it was the way the screen was shot, like the angle.
yeah.
But I mean,
I do think he's tall. Here,
I mean, he must be, right? I mean, she looked like she was half his size.
yeah,
And so he's just like physically daunting also. And yet he has such a handsome face. And I thought like all of that was so interesting because yeah, I think that casting, he's such a small part. He's a small part in the book in a lot of ways, and he's a very small part in the film. And yet his presence is looming.
yes,
And I felt like all of that unfolded in a way that propelled the story really well. And oh my gosh, all that there were times where like I wanted to go back to the text and be like, because I felt like things were said quite differently
yes,
throughout the movie in a way that I thought was interesting. But that whole conversation about the nickname and her getting ever darker and all of that, and then him saying outright about his hatred of Black
Yes.
people. I mean, oh my goodness. So I felt like some things had been contextualized for modern audiences in a way to make sure that people got it, that like they knew what was happening and why. And so I thought, oh, that was really well done. And with his horrific character, like that all of that showed why when, again, we haven't seen him for so long, we don't see him. And then, you know, when he shows up at the party at the end, we know how impactful that is because his presence is ever, you know, pervasive throughout everything that Claire is doing.
Oh my goodness. When Irene meets him on the street with her friends.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. He's 6'4", by the way. So yeah, he's really
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I was curious about that. At the time of watching the movie, I was like, okay, don't get distracted here. But yes, I did wonder. That run-in on the street I thought was really interesting. That is a time, though, that I felt the impact more because I had read the book.
Absolutely.
I think I'm not sure I would have really understood the significance of that without some help in the film. Whereas, like, I knew, of course, from the book.
Well, I'm going to bring in some trivia here. So Rebecca Hall, who directed, also wrote the screenplay. And it said she spent 10 years on it. So she drafted it very quickly and then spent a lot of time revising. And she is biracial, but presents as white. And one of her reasons that she said she was so drawn to this is because of that experience in Hollywood and the way her race is treated. And so I thought that was really fascinating that she had that personal connection. And she said when she was casting the roles of Irene and Claire, she wanted actresses who could both play the other role because she felt like there needed to be that physical similarity because that mirroring was such an important part of the choices that they'd made. So I thought all of that was just absolutely fascinating. And clearly it was so thoughtfully developed.
Yeah, that is fascinating. That is really interesting. Well, and even the end where Claire, we see her body, like you said about the light throughout, and then we see her body on the white snow. And I thought, like, oh my gosh, like there's just so much throughout about highlighting the life she's chosen to live and all the costs of it versus Irene's, which also is costly to her.
Yes.
I mean, we talked about that when we talked about the novel, but you know, that she also it's costing her a lot. I did think that the film version, I was more acutely aware of the kind of classism and the way that Irene, like I thought that they did a really interesting job of accentuating her, the helper or the servant was Zoo. You know, she was present in the book, but I felt like we had, and you saw some of that commentary there, but I felt like with this, it looks like it's Ashley Ware Jenkins who plays Zoo in this, and I felt like her character was more present, and also we saw the difference between Claire's attitude towards Zoo and Irene's attitude towards Zoo, and I thought that was really illuminating because I think that is an important like subplot of the book that is not necessarily highlighted as much. And so I thought, oh, that was just really interesting.
Because Irene is constantly having to establish the distinction between them. There's an insecurity there that Claire does not have to worry about because if you're presenting as white, of course no one's going to get you confused. But yet, I think part of that class focus, you see that in their home, certainly.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And again, I thought that was more accentuated in the film when they did like all the stairs and they're having to go up so high that like they need to be carried. I mean, yes. So I felt like that was really demonstrated well there.
And then the glamour of the parties and Irene's whole interactions, every interaction with Hugh.
Oh my goodness.
That was developed. Again, that was not all that different from on the page, but I thought Camp's acting as Hugh. It's Bill Camp, I think, is his first. Yeah. Yes. Bill Camp's acting as Hugh. And he was not originally cast in that role. It was someone else who couldn't do it. I forget now who it was supposed to be. And he was local. And so because it was shot on a very low budget, he was able to just slide in. I thought that their relationship was so interesting. And it was originally Benedict Cumberbatch,
Oh,
which I think would have been so different.
that would have been very different. I mean, I think that just age alone comes to mind
Mm-hmm.
quickly, unless they tried to age, to make him look a lot older. Because
Yeah.
I felt like part of the power of Hugh's character was not only his whiteness and his maleness, like his privilege with which he's walking in the world because he feels so entitled, but also, and feels like every door is open to him, but also his age as
Yes.
part of it too.
Yeah.
And I thought that their relationship, I thought that was interesting. I felt like there was a lot of commentary there about Irene and Hugh and the dynamics between them that made me think interesting, like
Yes.
what's going on here. Like there was like a chemistry there that I didn't notice in the book. Now that doesn't mean that it wasn't present. Maybe it was a nuance I did not pick up on, but I felt like there was some commentary there that we're both supposed to be thinking about whether these people are attracted to each other.
Right.
And also recognizing that part of it is like Irene versus Claire, and that like Irene is going to be proper or good or whatever marker we want to put on her, that she's not going to pursue that in the way that Claire is going to take action with Brian, which we haven't talked about Andre Holland's role or acting here, but I thought he was a phenomenal casting for the character of Brian. But, I think we see these like parallel dynamics and then the ways that they are playing out that I thought were really interesting.
Well, but just even she's looser when she's talking to Hugh.
Yes.
And so smart in a way that she doesn't get to be or chooses not to be in any other interactions. And so you can see this fierce intelligence and just this. It's interesting because I would think that she would be more tightened up when she was talking to this white man. And yet that was the person with whom she felt most free, which I found just... that dynamic was so fascinating. And I don't know if it's just because there was no expectation and like there was no chance of anything happening. And so she could do that. It was almost like a flirtation with nothing behind it. Or I don't know what it was, but I thought that was really interesting. And just that he does understand her in a way a lot of the other characters don't. I mean, that moment when she drops the teapot and he really cares for her and he does something very kind for her that you can see him making the choice to play it this way. Is real.
Yes. In some ways, I think it's because passing the novel, like there's so much going on that like I didn't think a lot about Hugh at all because there's all these other dynamics at play. And in the film, I was just so much more acutely aware of his role. And I think it was highlighted, even though it was still a subplot, I did think it was just highlighted in really interesting ways. And like you said, Jen, it was striking to me, the things that she said and did with him and the freedom with which she did them. And I think you're right that with Brian, we see how tightly she holds everything in order to try to make herself what she thinks he wants her to be. Whereas with Hugh, she's very at ease.
Yeah. Yeah, her relationship with Brian, I remember conversations, but the prevalence of their conversations about race and how to handle their conversations with their children really stood out to me in the film.
Yeah.
The conversations about the man who was lynched in Little Rock and about being called the N-word and all of that, I thought really stood out. Just the disparity between the ways that they were approaching raising their kids, and that she is in some ways in denial that because of their wealth and their position, they don't have to tell their kids these things. And Brian, maybe it's because of he's dark-skinned, he's male, she's light-skinned, she can get by with things, but he feels like they need to know in a way that she does not. Maybe it's just a maternal versus paternal instincts. I don't know, but I thought that that gap between their vision for what they want their relationships with their children to be, that was really interesting. And again, that was in the book, but it didn't stand out to me as one of the big focuses the way it did in the film.
Yeah, I thought it was more highlighted as well. And I felt like it was a way that we could see some of the issues with Irene's approach. I mean, I think we really, even though there were things that really frustrated me about Brian, I definitely empathize with him in that situation. and thought, we do have to tell our kids the truth. And it is up to us to help them know and understand and reckon with the world that they are surrounded by. And I understood her desire to protect, but also felt that it was extremely naive. And so I think you really see that in the film, whereas like, yeah, I felt like it was more of a passing comment in the text that was drawn out there. And similarly with him wanting to leave the country, I felt like that was stated more outright in the dialogue and the way that he presented that, whereas like it was more nuanced in the novel. And sometimes I wondered if he really did want that, or if she just projected that she thought he knew she thought he wanted a specific thing, and she was like assuming that, whereas like we saw it outright with him in the film that like that was his desire, is to escape this, completely white supremacist society and go somewhere where those dynamics would not be in play. And again, we can see throughout the film and understanding what the social context is like, why that's desirable.
Right.
And that they have the agency to do it. So it's like that it was a realistic desire that, he could have taken his family and started a life somewhere else. That wasn't completely outside what is possible for them.
Yeah. What did you make of all of her naps?
Oh my gosh, what was going on there, Jen?
I don't know, because I was like
she was drugged? I mean,
is she self-medicating?
I thought she was self-medicating. Like to the point that
escape, or I don't know.
I thought it had to do with escape, and I thought it was like taking sleeping medication in order to not think, because I think we're supposed to recognize that at that point she knows that there's something going on between Claire and Brian.
But they started even before that. Although I did think she started to suspect earlier in the film than she did in the book.
Yes. I felt like everything was kind of sped up.
Yeah.
Because even the thing with John and that whole encounter and her realizing what a horrible person he was, I felt all that happened like much more quickly.
Which makes sense. But
yeah. I did think all of that was weird. I mean, I was kind of like, what exactly is going on here and why?
Yeah. And she's always like, Brian's always having to come wake her up or call her. Yeah. And one of her sons makes the comment, "Oh, are you going back to bed?" And so... Yeah.
So, like, is she depressed?
Taking laudanum? Is she? Yeah. Maybe that's an older thing. I always think of the Wild West and a lot of people self-medicating with laudanum. A little bit of opium and alcohol to get you through the day. But, yeah, I don't know. I thought that was, again, visually it was arresting, and it did give a rhythm to the film.
Yeah.
But I kept thinking, I feel like I'm supposed to be getting something out of it that I'm just not getting.
Right. Well, I think maybe we were supposed to see her mental health deteriorating, and that it's like edging her closer to the person who's able to do the push at the end. But it was a little bit, I felt like maybe I wasn't getting the intended effect.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking back at my notes because I explicitly said, I was like, is she taking meds to sleep? Like, what is happening here? But the crack in the ceiling, I thought was really effective symbolically, and just like that ever deepening fissure. How things are, falling apart more and more.
I kept thinking of the yellow wallpaper.
Yes.
And of The Great Gatsby, because I think there's some real connection between Tom and Jack.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Claire is very much a Daisy in some ways.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Mm-hmm.
And the way she played her accent, I thought that was really, some of it I think is just the time, but there was something very dramatic as an actor in like the way her accent played out. It was really... And I've seen her in other things, but I think that was a deliberate choice. That's not the way she normally talks.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yes, that's a good point about Gatsby. And same, I thought a lot about the yellow wallpaper, and especially when she got into the bed and she's like in the bedroom, and the house is reflecting some of the things that she is feeling. So yeah, I felt like we saw, we just kind of how things both were already very fraught at the opening, and yet how they're exponentially worse as things unfurl.
Yeah.
So
I loved the visual thread that Hall chose to put through like all the foreshadowing moments. So you have the man collapsed on the sidewalk at the beginning, clearly foreshadowing Claire. You have she drops the pot out of the window. So it was really interesting. And again, I don't know if I would have picked up on any of that had I not read the book.
yeah.
But the ways that we see building from the very beginning, this sense of tension and this sense of oppressiveness, that first day when, yeah, she's just overcome out on the sidewalk and going into that white space is a relief, and yet it's not. There's a different kind of oppressiveness and tension. So there's nowhere she can go. She can't go home. There's nowhere she can go that she truly feels free, again, except with Hugh, which I'm not sure what the commentary there is. That, you know, it's that whole idea that when you're at a party, again, this is from Gatsby, that the most intimate place to be is at a party with a lot of people, and then you're totally private and you can be yourself. Is that why? Because she was always with Hugh in public spaces where no one was really paying attention to her. There you go.
Yeah, there's a lot about the space and who belongs and who doesn't belong. And I thought it was really powerful when Jack comes to the door and the person says, "Careful, you're the only
white person here." Yes.
And I thought like that was so resonant, and it also spoke to, of course, Claire is there, and Claire has been spending her adult life passing, and so just this idea of the people who can be somewhat chameleon in those spaces and the people who cannot, and both the privilege but also the oppression of that. And I thought all that was just so interesting, and yet he continues to approach, and I thought like we both see how threatening he is. I mean, again, I think that was a really well cast character because he says virtually nothing, and yet he is terrifying. And so he's like physically threatening, but then also he's really far from her.
Yes.
And that idea that like, and then Brian accusing him and saying that he must have pushed her. I mean, again, we talked about a lot of that, but I thought that I both wanted that scene to be, I felt like it happened so quickly. And in some ways I wanted to like slow it down a bit. But then also like part of the shock of the book is that it happens in an instant and then it's over. So, you know, I think it is reflective of how it played out in the book in some ways. But yeah, I thought all of that was just really well paced, I guess. I mean, I just thought it was just really interesting about like, there he is. I thought that comment was really powerful. I thought that, you know, there's all these people stopping him, and yet he still finds his way to her. And how cavalier she is about it. How indifferent she is. As if to say, I knew this was coming all along.
Right.
And so what?
Well, because Irene has just said, have you ever thought about what would happen? And she's almost yearning for it.
Yes, right. In some ways, she just wants it to be over. She wants that to have been discovered so that she can take that next step.
Yes, which for Irene is a horrible threat, because if she just comes and lives where they live, she can see the path that is going to be laid out in front of Brian and Claire and
and what that'll mean for her. Right. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So it was fascinating. It was such a great, and it's not that long. I think it could have been, I'm both torn because I think it could have been a little longer to put back in some of the things that were in the book that weren't in the film. And yet the pacing and parts of it felt quite measured. And so I don't know that it needed to be like 2 hours.
Right.
I always want all the things to be in it, but would it have made a difference if that interaction between Jack and Claire and their friend whose name Jack and Irene and their friend whose name I can't remember on the sidewalk, did that need to be longer? Did that, what would have been added? Maybe nothing. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, 5 stars. I love that.
Yes, me too. I thought it was great.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thank you as always for your support. And yeah, we hope you had a good time watching Passing. Let us know what you think.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that discussion of Nella Larsen's Passing, the film adaptation. If you have read that book or if you watched the film or both, definitely let us know. You can find us at Unabridged Pod on Instagram, but we would love to hear your thoughts. We chatted about that in groups when we first read the book together, but we would love to hear your thoughts now. We're going to finish up today with our Lit Chat game, and Jen has a question for us, I think.
I actually have two. So there are always two questions on a card, and I like both of these. So, is there a book you've never read, but tell people you have? Why? Is there a book you're embarrassed to admit you have read?
Yes and yes. Okay, let's see. The first one, I definitely tell people that I have read The Catcher in the Rye, and I think I might have, but I am not sure. So that one comes to mind as one that I'm like, I know every event that happened in that book. Have I read it, Jen? I am not sure. Have I told people I have? Definitely yes. So I think that one would be a good example. I'm sure there are others that I'm like a little fuzzy about. It was assigned to me. Did I read the assignment? Teenage Ashley did not always do that. Not sure. I had a lot going on. I'm not sure. Yeah, so that's one. What about for you? I bet, is there an answer is there one for you for that question?
I don't think
Jen?
so. I think I have a pretty good sense of the books I've read. There have been moments, like I remember telling someone I've read all of Frederick Bachman's books, and then I was like, oh, wait, no, there's one I haven't. So I immediately then went out and bought it. So I was not a liar for long, but not
This is something I admire about you, but do not have in common with you. But yes.
But yeah, not as in I'm knowingly falsifying my reading credentials. No. All right. What about the second one? Is there a book you're embarrassed to admit you have read?
Definitely yes. The first one that came to mind is Stephanie Meyer's Twilight. And not only did I read that, friends, I read the entire series obsessively. Okay. There you go.
It's so funny because that's the first thing that popped in. So I have a student who's reading them now and asked if I'd read them. And I was like, right. So it's a delicate place to talk about this with a student because she loves them. And so, and when I read them, yeah, I was obsessed. Like I remember I'd gotten the first book and school had just started, but I got it because every year I go around and I ask the students to tell me what they're reading, just to start to get to know them. And so many kids were reading it. And I was like, well, I have to know what it's about. So I went out and got the first book and stayed up till like 1 a.m, finishing it. And then immediately got the rest on Kindle. And I think maybe 3 of the 4 were out. And I've also read Midnight Sun, the retelling from his perspective, from Edward's perspective. So, I mean, I've gone all in, people. I will say ashamed or embarrassed is a weird word because I've really worked through my feelings with that because I used to be embarrassed to tell people I read romance novels. And I feel like that is something I try to talk to my students about as well. Right. Just reading for different purposes and reading sometimes because you want a book that you know exactly how it's going to end and that kind of comfort reading. Anyway, it's all very complicated. But yes.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think it was one of the first times that I was like, oh, this is what people mean when they say guilty pleasure. Because I definitely felt the guilt alongside the joy of reading it. And I was like, this is disgusting. Like, why am I into, like, he is so like predatorily territorial over her. And I could not stop. So I did feel that internal conflict is part of why I think even at the moment of reading it, I mean, sorry, I'm just going to trash things here. It's like, poorly written. I mean, like very visibly poorly written. So like the whole time I'm thinking, I cannot believe that I'm so immersed in this thing that I can point on any given page to all the reasons why it's poorly written. And here I am sucking it in. But I agree with you, Jen, that also we should never have shame about things that we enjoy and that make us happy and that are fun to read. Fine.
Yeah.
But it was the first thing that came to mind.
Yes. Well, not only did I read all the books, but I took my husband to watch all the movies with me. And I will say he was not as much a fan.
Testament to your lovely husband who went with you.
Yes. So
good for you all.
Anyway, well, I thought that was a fun card right there.
That is a fun card. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We will look forward to talking again soon.
Do you have comments or opinions about what you heard today? We'd love to hear them. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Unabridged Pod or on the web at unabridgedpod.com for ways to support us. To get more involved, you can sign up for our newsletter, join a buddy read, or become an ambassador. Thanks for listening to Unabridged.